Well, hello everybody and welcome to TLS Weight Loss Solution. The focus today is on grains and how you can utilize grains or know more about grains to be able to manage your weight and your health. But remember, these webinars have been designed basically as an adjunct to all of the incredible tools that are available through the TLS weight loss system, and basically are just intended to provide extra support and guidance. They are not intended to replace all of those critical tools and resources that are available through both TLS and TLSslim.com. But we come up with these webinars as a way for people to be able to learn more information remotely and to be able to support you along with the TLS coach that you have been assigned to. So the tools that are available, of course, make sure that you're still utilizing your TLS Weight Loss Solution Health Guide because it is a wealth of information. I find it's always really helpful to go back and just get back to basics, learning again about how alcohol is impacting your blood sugar. How do you calculate a net carb? You know, what are some good resources in terms of eating out that you can utilize, getting back to journaling and all inside. If you're an online person or want a mobile app, TLSslim.com is awesome. And it's being changed constantly, so it's very dynamic in nature. There are now well over 250,000 entries, not 90,000 food restaurants. They will help you to track your food intake every day. Even the food journaling is becoming easier, but if you spend just a little time in the beginning, putting in a little effort to log some of the regular foods or meals that you are eating on a daily basis, that logging part becomes so much easier, and it's a great visual to really give you an idea of how your intake of food is not just affecting you, but sort of where it's coming from protein, carbohydrates, fats, and then really what your fiber content is. There are also, of course, the site. If you download the free app, you don't have you do use your mobile app to be able to record, let's say, exercise or food, it will go ahead an adjunct to one another. Now, for grains today, we're looking at how they affect your weight and how they affect your health because, again, TLS Weight Loss Solution is really more about a total health program. It's not really just about your weight. It's just that a lot of us are focused on our weight, and it is a symptom and a side effect, basically, of unhealthy eating, of inflammation, and of other issues that are going on, and we want to get control. So some people do choose to add grains back in, typically if you're following rapid results and not something like the Sure and Steady plan where you haven't really eliminated grains, just maybe minimized them. But if you've been following rapid results, somewhere around week 6, you can sort of take a look and say, do I want to add grains, and how then am I to add grains back in? And you have to take a really good assessment of yourself at this point to decide, is that something I want to do? I know that 50% of people choose not to just because they feel so good, and we're going to talk about that. But if you are somebody who feels like that would be a really good added benefit and you would have more staying power long term as this is a lifestyle, you just want to know which grains are going to be good for you. How do you customize that into your program? What's your response to grains? Which ones are going to bode well with you and which ones aren't? So for basics of the grains, just remember that these are also carbohydrates. So when you look at proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, grains fall under the category of carbohydrates. Examples of these would be rice or anything with wheat or rye or corn, different flours, couscous, quinoa, all these types of things are grains. And it is also important to know that your body really does not require grains and would be perfectly happy without them. Your ancestors did not, go through wheat fields in terms of eating that kind of grain as a mainstay of their diet, but rather they, had grass-fed, or grass-based things, and they had vegetables and fruits and legumes and other things like that, not the grains, not the wheat. But use of whole grains in your diet are perfectly fine. It's just that everybody's body is different. So we are focused on whole grains that are intact, not the whole grain that you're going to see on the front of a Trix or Cheerios box, not anything that's been milled or processed, but rather a whole grain that is completely intact like barley or something of that nature. But you need to identify which ones then are going to be right for you. And one of the main concerns, of course, is sensitivity and inflammation that can be created by grains and by the intake of grains, and really also in the quantity that we have probably been eating them. If you think back, previous to 6 weeks ago in terms of how much you were consuming, how many slices of a whole grain bread were you eating, or a white bread or a wheat bread or a rye bread or whatever, whether it was high or low GI? How many servings of rice, of your wheat pastas, of all these types of things, kashi cereals, granola bars, were you having prior to this? And it would probably go upwards of somewhere between 6 and 15 for most people. And that's really the answer to why we've gotten into the situation we're in. And it doesn't mean that some of those things can't be added back in, but again, it's never going to be in that ratio. So it is important to know that some people do have sensitivities, not just to grains, but to foods in general, and some people can really develop an intolerance to certain grains. So figuring that out is going to help with the customizing process. So also important to know that many grains like wheat have been genetically modified, which means that let's say your body was able to process it. Let's say your ancestors were able to eat wheat. There were famine conditions around, and they went ahead to the wheat fields and they were able to eat that. It wasn't in a place where it was genetically modified so that your body couldn't recognize it. It may not have been the best food for them, but in small quantities, their body really knew how to be able to break it down or could adapt to do so. Nowadays, you're not finding that at all. So the term GMO is what you want to look at, but because so much of the wheat today has been genetically modified, it really is creating, sickness within us, and is really difficult for your body to sort of recognize and learn how to be able to break that down and process that. But also often grains have had their gluten content increased, because if you think of like a bagel, the gluten, which is the protein in wheat, is really what makes that bread real sticky on the inside and kind of crunchy on the outside. And isn't that what we're always sort of looking for, that Italian bread, right? That's real, mushy on the inside and crunchy on the outside, and that's gluten. So you can take an Italian bread from today, and you can take one from 50 years ago maybe in the baker shop, and really the amount of grains and how processed that bread was 50 years ago is going to be different, including the fact that in mass production, the gluten content has been increased for, let's say, that same Italian bread now than it was years ago. But either way, it's important to know that whether it's a healthy grain, as we'll talk about, or a low GI grain or not, grains in general are inflammatory creating foods. So just like chicken or dairy or things that maybe you're consuming that you're okay to consume, it is all about, the percentage of how much of your diet is coming from an inflammatory type of food versus ones that are anti-inflammatory, like the vegetables and the fruits and the good fats and things of that nature. So the deal with gluten, everybody hears about gluten. Gluten is actually the protein in wheat, similar to how casein is the protein in dairy. And like I said earlier, it is what makes sort of bread sticky and stuff like that. So it definitely adds to taste and texture. Typically, it is found in wheat, rye, and barley. Okay, so it's naturally found in wheat, rye, and barley. It's not found in quinoa or some other grains. But I put oats there with a little asterisk because a lot of oats are then contaminated with gluten just because of where they're processed. You can find gluten-free oats, so just kind of keep that, in the back of your head. Or a steel-cut oat should not contain gluten, but again, you may have to look at the packaging to be able to be sure. And there's sort of 3 levels of what we're talking about here in terms of sensitivities and things like that. There's a sensitivity, which means that you could get some kind of inflammatory reaction, whether you feel it or not. You may get a skin breakout or something like that. Then we have like a full-blown intolerance, which means that your body is really producing a lot of antibodies against a food, and that food may be doing a lot of tissue damage on the inside, causing, again, an excess of inflammation and really starting to interrupt, regular processes in your body. Now, that's not to say a sensitivity is not bad. It is. And if you have several food sensitivities, that can be a problem, and it can lead to an intolerance. But it's just not as severe and sort of the chain as like an intolerance would be. If you are full-blown celiac, if you've been diagnosed as a celiac, though, you really cannot have gluten at all. And it's having, even an intolerance or sensitivity can have either GI effects for you or neurological effects for you. But it is important to know that, celiac means that your body just absolutely does not have the ability to process anything with gluten in it. Now, you can be sensitive to a grain that doesn't have gluten, okay, but a lot of people are gluten sensitive, and because of the amount that we've been sort of bombarded with, it is likely that a lot of people do have a sensitivity to gluten and off into other food sensitivities as well, and could be the reason why, you're still not getting fully the results you're looking for, either from a weight loss, a back pain, skin eruption, like any of these kinds of things, mood changes, whatever, could still be related to some of the grains or the gluten. But also keep in mind that gluten, wheat, or whatever can be found in some of the products that you're eating. So you may have eliminated all grains, but you may be still having mass-produced poultry or beef in your diet right now. But if that's not a grass-fed, beef, then it is likely that that animal was eating corn or was eating wheat that contained, still are consuming it in some way, shape, or form. It's also important to know it's in some hair products. So you might see like wheat hydrolyzed, something in a hair product, a shampoo or conditioner. You may get breakouts around the outside of your skin or something like that. That could be because of a hair product or a hairspray. Soups, dressing, marinades, and things like that could also contain gluten in it too. So you really do have to look at the back of a label so that you can see whether or not it contains wheat, rye, barley, oat, or has gluten in it. Now, you have to get blood tested, and not all blood tests will identify a problem with gluten or tell you whether or not you're celiac, because there are about 22 parts to the gluten molecule, and really, if you go to a regular MD, typically the regular test that's done for gluten intolerance or for celiac disease is that they're only looking at 4 parts of that molecule. So what can happen very frequently, you can see that there's a high percentage of parts of the molecule that are not tested. And if they don't find that there's a problem with any of those 4, you will get maybe a false negative where you really could have a sensitivity or intolerance to any of the other parts of the gluten molecule, but it isn't typically tested. So it is a very specialized blood test. It's important to know that if you are, it's a great idea to go, if your insurance covers it, to your MD and just get a gluten intolerance test if you're suspecting something. But if it does come back negative, doesn't necessarily mean it is negative on that test, so you may just want to go for further testing. But if it comes out positive, then you just know for sure right then and there. So you can, other than a blood test, you could do a stool test. Really important. Sometimes with the stool test, they'll see that like DNA is still on the stool from gluten, because if you haven't eaten it in a while, you may not blood test for it anyway. But there's, muscle testing, which is sort of like applied kinesiology, where you're testing the strength of your muscles holding different foods. This is one way to kind of just get a sense. It's usually backed up by blood tests, but it's not 100%, and a lot of it has to do with who's doing the testing on you. But that can give you a really good idea if you're sensitive to a food. Of course, you can just eliminate foods. A lot of people will say, gee, I tested negative on a regular blood test at my doctor for celiac or for gluten, but I just feel a lot better when I'm not eating it. And there's something to be said there. So maybe they didn't have the actual blood test to tell them, but they really can tell through elimination that that is really a problem. Hair testing is not as accurate because you're not looking at specifically antibodies, but you can have some hair tests done. And then, of course, you can just see what kind of reactions that you get. I know if I eat gluten and I am tested for gluten intolerance, that my mood will tank within about 15 minutes. And it affects me neurologically like that. I can definitely get depressed. It will definitely affect my ability to absorb nutrients and B vitamins and things like that, as it would for anybody. But I see what my reaction is right away, whereas other people might get GI discomfort right away, or get skin issues or rashes, or something like they would for an allergy, because you could be getting a histamine response of an issue. Now, let's say you have a potential sensitivity. These are some of the questions you can kind of ask yourself. In any grain, not just gluten, but any grain, it's sort of like, if in the morning do your rings get tight? Do you bloat right after you eat a grain? Maybe you had a beer, gluten containing. Maybe you had a Barilla Plus pasta, and you learned after today that, that was one of the okay pastas, or the Dream Fields in it, so it was very low GI or whatever, but you felt bloated even after a very small amount. If you retain water, and you just feel very squishy, or you get tired right away after eating that food. I remember making a very high protein, high fiber pancake, but I'm gluten intolerant. So it didn't matter that I had made it to a point where it had high protein, it was low GI. That was not good for me. I was on the couch for 2 hours just feeling so tired and so fatigued I felt I couldn't get up. Do you have acne or other skin conditions? That's definitely going to be a food-related sort of issue, and most of the time that's either going to be a dairy or a grain. You could sometimes rub the grain on your skin. I know for kids especially, like if I rub oats on one of my kids' arms, just the raw oats or whatever, their skin turns red right away. And I'm not saying that I'm like rubbing it hard, but anytime, and I used to do that because when they were little and I had started them on oatmeal, let's say they were a year old or something, and they would get the food all over their face, their skin would turn crazy red all around their mouth. and that was a very good indication that they were getting some kind of a reaction to that food. And then another one is if you gain weight immediately the next day. Now, I'm not a proponent of weighing yourself every day or even necessarily every week, but if you gain a pound or two and your weight has been consistent, you could gain a half a pound overnight just from eating the wrong food or a food that's creating inflammation for you, and that's really important. But another idea of what you could do is measure your waist. And so the before and after is 72 hours. Basically, you take your waist measurement, and then you go without the grains for 72 hours, and you see what happens to that waist measurement. You may have already noticed that because in the first 6 weeks, you may have already lost, 2 to 4 inches on your waist. That right there is not just about the changes in the food in general, which of course you're eating so much healthier right now, but most likely that's an elimination of grains. So if you do add grains back in and you notice your waist measurement increases or your weight gain slows down, that's potentially a sensitivity issue, because most people, if they're not sensitive, are not going to get that if they're eating the right grains in the right amounts. Now, which grains cause the most inflammation? Well, here they are in descending order. No surprise that wheat, oats, rye, and corn and barley, I mean, here most of them are gluten-containing, and then corn, of course, is in like everything and is very abrasive to your GI tract, and oats, which are typically contaminated with gluten, are actually the ones that create the highest amount of reaction for people and can cause the most inflammation. Underneath that, it sort of diminishes in terms of the likeliness that it's going to cause inflammation. So it's going in descending order with rice, with buckwheat, kasha, or wheat berries, with millet, amaranth, or quinoa. And so if you look at that list, the ones on the very bottom, like maybe the bottom 4 or 5, are really the ones that you would want to start with if you were going to add something back in. So, maybe you go with a low GI wrap, okay, but if gluten is an issue for you, you may want to try a gluten-free wrap as one of the first ones if that's really the thing that you're looking for. For me, I would better to start some or rice or something like that as one of the first things that they do try. Now, don't be surprised or don't fall into the traps with marketing when everybody says whole grain. Whole grain is important, but when they say it's got 8 grams of whole grains, all that really equates to is about 1 gram of fiber. So we like the number 8 because it seems high, in terms of everything that we've learned, but it doesn't equate high to fiber. So 8 grams of whole grains isn't really a big deal. It'd be a really big deal if it said that it had, 24 to 36 grams of whole grains, but most things don't say that, because then you're just buying the whole grain itself. You're not buying a cereal that's milled in process that has 8 grams of whole grains within it. So also it's important to know that for marketing, they use terms that, man, would make you want to right away go and run and buy that type of bread or cereal or whatever it is because of the wording of it. So these are the things that actually do mean whole grain, and it does not mean that they're low glycemic impact, okay? So, but I'm just teaching you first from a grain perspective. Whole grains would be whole wheat, whole oats, whole rye, oatmeal, graham flour, or bulgur brown rice as examples. But what are the things that we see that draw our eye in when we're in the grocery store? 7-grain or multi-grain, 100% wheat, stone ground, bran, cracked wheat. Those actually do not mean that that food is whole grain, and you would think that they would because they sound even so much better, don't they? So these are the terms of things you're actually wanting to stay away from, and you're wanting to go with something that may be more of in the whole grain category. So that's really important. Be careful of the marketing, and be careful that just because, let's say, you decide to try something gluten-free, or just because you want to try something that's whole grain does not necessarily mean that it's low glycemic impact or even that it's healthy. It's the same as seeing things that are organic. You can get organic mac and cheese, very high glycemic impact, very high in fat. It doesn't mean it's healthy for you. It just means that there's no antibiotic, steroids, and other cultures, that are in there that you don't want in there. And also remember that anything that is processed or milled, like flours and things like that, crackers or whatever, I don't care if they have whole grains in them. They're still milled and processed, and so that's still going to be a higher glycemic index food, and you just need to be aware of that. So, I'm not saying never have a cracker again, and if you're going to buy one, better to buy a whole grain one with, something like that in the holiday season. But really, those are the things that you're going to want to stay away from because they'd really be likened to having chips or pretzels. Now, how do you add them in? slowly, number one. You start with the ones, like I said, that may be a better grain to add, that maybe would be non-gluten containing just to start. And then you're going to want to add it in and then maybe wait 2 or 3 days to see what your reaction might be, because you could have a reaction up to 72 hours after eating that grain. It doesn't necessarily have to be immediate for people. So let's say you added in a serving of quinoa. There's a great quinoa recipe that you can grab either online or from your coach, and this is a great way to be able to, like, let's say, add that in and see how you react. Make sure you're journaling and being mindful of what your reactions are. Did your mood tank? Did you get any of those things like the bloating or, you know, the rings being, you know, or did you feel like you got to have a hangover the next day, you know, when you had a grain? Some people have a hard time processing quinoa, even though it seems like so healthy. But, you know, that would be maybe a good one to start with. Or like a basmati brown rice, you know, a little higher glycemic index, but if you add some fat to it, like some avocado, olive oil, maybe garlic and parsley or something like that, you can lower the GI of that, you know, or you add some black beans to it, you can lower the GI of it. So you're trying one of them at a time. You're starting with the least likely offenders in terms of sensitivities, and you're not eating them multiple times a day. So like I know people go either with like a low GI wrap or a rice, you know, based gluten-free wrap or whatever, that maybe not all low, you know, completely glycemic index low. But this is what they're trying, but you don't want to do that every day. And you don't want to do it at breakfast and lunch, you know. Or you went with a, you know, it had gluten in it, but you went with the Thomas's multigrain English muffin, you had a half a slice of that, or some Barilla Plus pasta, you know, and all of a sudden you're having it every day and you're right back to where you started from. So you don't want to do that. You want to really wait a few days and allow your body to sort of get acclimated and really see how it's really going to be affecting you. Now, it's really hard at parties and holidays sometimes, so some suggestions would be to make some homemade granola bars or blocks, you know, using like a gluten-free oat with like some gluten-free dairy and soy-free chocolate chip or regular chocolate chips if you're okay with that. You can sweeten it with a little bit of fresh honey and dates. You know, there's some great recipes that are out there, so without getting into all the details, you can put peanut butter in there and some protein shake or whatever. Because it's got the gluten in it, and it's definitely going to create more of a gassy situation and bloating. And wine typically has yeast, which can be something that a lot of people will maybe not bode well with them. If it bodes well with you, that's great. But vodka, if it's at least triple distilled, is going to be gluten-free, and it's going to be the lowest in terms of glycemic index. So you add to that maybe some club soda and some extra lime, maybe just a little splash of something in there in terms of a juice or a low sugar juice or something, or even some fresh essence of, you know, orange or cranberries or something like that, and you can do really well making a drink like that. How about quinoa instead of the white rice or the couscous, or you'd go with the sweet potato or the beans instead of squash instead of pasta. These are always good ideas to try to keep the grains to a minimum and you know, make some better choices as you're moving through. And if you're somebody who's chosen, after listening to all, you know, this sounds like too much, I just don't even think I want to add the grains, that's not a bad choice either, like I said. So maybe just knowing what you have sort of in your arsenal for what you want to add in, but if you're choosing not to right now, that's okay too. You have to take a hard look at the last 6 weeks and say, did I really follow no grains for 6 weeks? You know, if I was really true to that, I have the option to add it in right now. But if you really didn't follow it and it's taking you a little while to sort of get TLS and how we're eating underneath your belt, you may want to wait until you do have that stretch that your body can really kind of repair, not just in your terms of your GI tract, but just in terms of your metabolic reaction to food and how you're breaking down carbohydrates, to give it a chance before you're going to want to add that back in. Now, don't forget that there are supplements that can help. You know, like the core for me is really huge, and help with the cravings, you know, for carbohydrates, because that's going to lessen the impact of the carbohydrates on your blood sugar. It's a really important thing, especially if you are adding the carbohydrates back in. Then you have something that we have that's called isotonics line. It's called isotonic spectrum digestive enzymes, and they are on the spectrum line. What they have in them is an enzyme called glucose 500, and what this is a specific enzyme used for a lot of kids with autism, but I use it because it has in it an enzyme that breaks down both casein, which is the protein in dairy, and gluten, which is the protein in wheat. So even though I'm not eating that food, you know, if I go to a restaurant or I suspect that I've had something in my food, or I do choose to eat something that has that in it, if I take the enzymes, it's not going to necessarily eliminate the fact that I ate it, give you the enzymes present to be able to break it down. So even if you don't have an intolerance, but you have a sensitivity, this can be a really helpful enzyme to help you to break that down. Then we have our regular isotonic digest in general. And then, of course, on a regular basis, keeping your GI tract healthy with the probiotics or the aloe juice, or just having the isotonics as your regular source of vitamins, minerals, and supplements is really great because, A, for repair, really important, but B, for regular use because they're clean. They don't have dairy, they don't have soy, they don't have gluten. You can drink them. It's a very small amount of fruit sugar that is used naturally to be able to sweeten them. Of course, you're going to get more bang for your buck in terms of absorbability, so it's really important. So in summary, grains can be a very helpful part of your diet. I know for a lot of people, just for the sustainability of being able to live a lifestyle, some people are really happy without the grains, but if you do feel that you want them back in, it's okay. You just have to find the 1, 2, 3 things that you feel are okay, which ones are going to bode well with you, how often, how frequently are going to be the rule in terms of how you use them, what are the serving sizes, and just make sure, and then don't overpass the percentage of vegetables and fruits that you are eating. Everybody is different, so you just need to be mindful of any of the potential pitfalls with grains to your health in general, to your weight loss efforts, to your joints, which all of that inflammation can put internally on your joint inflammation, and really in terms of your affect or your mood, because for a lot of people there is a neurological sort of attachment with grains and how your body really responds to them. That's it for grains for today, so thanks so much for staying tuned, and you guys are doing a great job with the TLS weight loss system. Don't ever quit, just keep moving forward.